Shaq dropping breadcrumbs about a Nick Saban LSU reunion. So what do we believe? It's Locked on LSU. Here we go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get great podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. As always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you for that. And as always, we appreciate our audience watching on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. The big Aristotle, the big cactus, the big everything that Shaq has been called and calls himself over the years. Well, now how about the big rumor? If you have not yet heard, Shaquille O'Neal, in an interview with Us Weekly, made a comment about Nick Saban possibly returning to LSU. I'll read you the quote from Shaq, and then we'll talk about it. Why there might be some validity to what Shaq is saying. And I will give you a little more detail about what I have heard in the last 36 hours, because I think there has been some legitimacy to the LSU Nick Saban conversation. There has been also wild, reckless speculation on the internet, as you would expect during the silly season, but I will give you as much detail as I feel comfortable giving you as of right now in just a second. But let's start with what Shaq said, and then we'll sort of build from there. So in an interview with Us Weekly, Shaquille O'Neal made a 2-sentence statement that has gotten a lot of people's attention. Quote, this is Shaquille O'Neal, quote, I heard through the grapevine that they were having conversations with Nick Saban. That'd be awesome if we can bring Nick back. Okay. I think maybe the most important thing to start here, and something I always say with every type of rumor or report or piece of speculation, always is consider the source. Right? Always consider the source. The other thing I say in coaching searches is believe nothing, consider everything. But more on that. Again, believe nothing, consider everything. So I'm not believing Nick Saban's coming back, but I'll consider the possibility, which we'll talk about here. So let's go back to consider the source. Well, your source here is Shaquille O'Neal. Okay? I don't think, now I've met Shaq plenty. I can't say that we're friends or anything. He's been in studio with me a handful of times, interviewed him a dozen times, paths cross in professional settings and different, whatever. But I'm not sitting here telling you I know Shaq or he knows me. I mean, we, any more than just casually, right? Like he does a million people walking the face of planet Earth. But what I also know about Shaq is he's worth $500 million. And he's probably not sitting there scrolling Twitter rumors. You know what I mean? Like, Shaq attended LSU, played 3 years at LSU, went pro, came back in 2000, finished his degree, and is a staple. He makes a couple of home football games every year. He DJs at Fred's. He comes back for charitable events, different events in and around the city. He is very much a staple and a presence, and has maintained his presence in and around the LSU community, right? So it's not like this is some distant from afar comment Shaq's making after scrolling Twitter or Reddit. You know what I mean? Like, Shaq is, anyone at LSU will take Shaq's call instantly. That's any athletic administrator, any university administrator, any booster, anyone. So if Shaq calls and wants a little bit of the skinny, they're going to talk to Shaq, whoever they are, okay? So consider the source being Shaquille O'Neal, and Shaquille O'Neal is most likely referencing or alluding to conversations he has had, not things that he has read carelessly on Facebook that your grandmother posted or your uncle who has a source, a quote, highly placed source who doesn't really know anybody or anything about anything because nobody's talking to that person. They'll talk to Shaq. So that's number one. So you at least have my attention considering the source is Shaquille O'Neal. Now, the other thing that I think is important to understand is how things like this could work. Because what I alluded to just a moment ago is that some of the conversations that I have had here in the last 36 hours lead me to believe that there has absolutely been contact made with Nick Saban about gauging his interest in this job. Now, who is making that contact, the degrees to which it's courtesy, how all that works. I do want to get into that. So I am going to get to that in just a second. But before I go further, I want to make sure that I'm abundantly clear because I don't want to be accused of rumor mongering. I don't want to be accused of clickbaiting because that's not what I do. And I have no interest in doing that. But if Shaquille O'Neal says something, it carries a far greater degree of credibility, and I'm going to talk about it. Now, let me remind you, okay, when Brian Kelly was fired, and if you're an everydayer, we've talked about Saban once before, and I played this for him. I'm going to play it again for those that might have missed it. Paul Feinbaum was on ESPN when Brian Kelly got fired and said this about Nick Saban.
Saban wouldn't talk to Penn State. He wouldn't talk to Florida. But I think he would talk to LSU, at least to see what they have to offer. And by the way, sometimes you can come back and make an offer that even a man who will be 74 years old on Halloween might consider. I think it's worth thinking about. And I'm already hearing on our show down here in the South, Alabama fans saying, please tell me it's not true. Don't tell me that Nick Saban's going to LSU.
Okay. So again, I'm not saying Paul Feinbaum is gospel, but Paul Feinbaum knows Nick Saban has for a long time and thinks that he would listen. Nick Saban on the Pivot podcast with Ryan Clark in the spring called leaving LSU the biggest mistake of his career.
When I left LSU, that was probably professionally the biggest mistake that I ever made. Not because we didn't have success in Miami, because I enjoyed coaching in Miami, but I found out in that experience that I like coaching in college better because you could develop players personally, academically, athletically, and all that a little more than in pro ball. Even though I love the status of coaching in pro football and the kind of guys you coached and you're coaching in the best league against the best players, I loved all that. So then I can't go back to LSU, go to Alabama, and no disrespect to Alabama. It's not Alabama versus LSU. It's just Jimmy Sexton stood on the balcony when I was getting ready to leave LSU and make a decision about whether I went to Miami or stayed at LSU. And he said, what do you want your legacy to be as a coach? Do you want to be Vince Lombardi or do you want to be Bear Bryant? And without hesitation, I said Bear Bryant. And he said, what are you doing going to Miami then? That's true. I don't know if I ever told that story, but that's the truth. We outside of Skip Bertman's office on the balcony, and I went anyway.
Went anyway. So again, Feinbaum thinks he listened. Saban has called leaving LSU the biggest mistake of his career, but he's also 74 years old and was on the McAfee show a week ago and said in no uncertain terms that he don't want to coach again.
You know, I want to stay retired, and I do not want him anywhere near Miss Terry. Because when she hears some of these numbers, she gets interested. And I ain't interested.
So again, I want to stay retired. I ain't interested. So Nick Saban is adamantly saying there he's not interested in coaching again. For what it's worth, I believe him. I don't think Nick Saban wants to coach again. I think he wants to stay retired. His salary with College Game Day is not publicly available, but you can look at some of the salaries that are out there with Kirk Herbstreit, for example, making a reported $10 million a season just to do Thursday Night Football. That's on top of what he's making to do College Game Day. All that to say, like, Nick Saban is certainly making 7, potentially low 8 figures to do College Game Day. Again, I don't know that number. I'm just guesstimating here based on what some of the industry standard is. He is making millions of dollars to do College Game Day and doesn't have to worry about NIL or the transfer portal or revenue share or any of that stuff along with it, and he can still stay close to the game, and he's good on TV and all that sort of stuff. So I believe him when he says he's not interested in leaving. He's not interested in coaching again. I believe that is the case. But everyone has their price, and everyone could potentially be prodded or pried out of retirement and back into coaching again if the situation and the circumstances is right. And that's what I want to get to next about how this situation with LSU could be evolving. We'll get to that as we continue Locked on LSU, your team every day. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And we're brought to you by Game Time. College football is back, and I couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real. Actually getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. Ugh. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best with no surprise fee. What you see is what you pay. Pulled up Game Time, just a couple of taps. Amazing deals. Talking about your favorite college football games as low as $25. And the app makes it super simple. You can even see the exact view from your seat before buying. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Okay, so Shaq kicks the anthill, says that he hears that LSU's talking to Nick Saban. We've established the fact that I think Shaq is certainly credible. People with influence would talk to Shaquille O'Neal. I don't think he's reading that off of Twitter. Also, Nick Saban has established the fact that he is not interested in a return to coaching, which I believe. The question is, could the powers that be get him out of retirement and back to LSU? Now, what I will say is, based on several of the conversations that I have had as I've pried around this situation, I do believe that there are folks with close ties to LSU who have spoken directly to Nick Saban about the possibility of coaching LSU again. That probably shouldn't come as a great surprise right now, but I think the real thing to remember here is who is it having those conversations, and do they have what autonomy or connectivity do they have with LSU? The other part of it is plausible deniability. For example, last week, Josh Brooks, who's the athletic director at Georgia, from Hammond, LSU alum, put out a statement Friday night on all of his social media platforms, effectively rebuffing any interest in the LSU AD job and saying he's staying at Georgia. Well, one of the lines was that he had not been contacted by anybody at LSU, or he had not spoken to anyone at LSU. That's true, because the athletic director wouldn't speak to anyone at LSU. His agent would, because that provides plausible deniability. It's no different than when a coach stands in front of a podium and says, I haven't had contact with another school. Right, you haven't had contact with another school, because the people in charge of that search do deals through intermediaries, through third parties, to allow plausible deniability. So Josh Brooks can write that social media post and say, I haven't spoken to anyone at LSU, and he's not lying. He hasn't spoken to anyone at LSU. That doesn't mean that his representatives haven't spoken to anyone at LSU. Now, I'm just using Brooks as an example. I actually don't know if Josh Brooks' agent has spoken to anyone at LSU. I'm just giving an illustration of a recent example to show you how that works in offering plausible deniability. Now, remember, Verge Osbury on Friday appointed interim athletic director and told that he has the authority to hire the next football coach at LSU. Okay. He also announced that he formed a committee, and that committee involves Scott Ballard, who's the chairman of the LSU Board of Supervisors, John Carmouche, who's the head of the athletics committee on the Board of Supervisors. Those were the two men with Verge Osbury at the press conference on Friday. Also, Ben Bordelon, who played at LSU. His two sons play at LSU presently, and he's the CEO of Bollinger, great benefactor of LSU, runs a giant business. And then E.J. Kuiper, who is the present CEO of the FMOL Health System, which runs Our Lady of the Lake, which is the single biggest benefactor of LSU athletics. So that's the committee. And then Verge said there was one more. Now, he didn't name that other person. And I'll be curious to see if we do get word on who that other person on the committee might be. But those men are acting in an official capacity representing LSU. Remember, Nick Saban spent 5 seasons in Baton Rouge. And during that time created some great friendships, which he has talked about openly, many of which that he still maintains. Still has a lot of friends in Baton Rouge. He also engaged in a lot of business endeavors in Baton Rouge. Nick Saban was part of the Perkins Road development in Baton Rouge. So he still has a lot of business partners and business connections in Baton Rouge on top of the personal relationships he developed with a lot of the donors and the boosters that were great supporters of the program while he was here. So as to say, there's plenty of people who live in Baton Rouge who are friends, benefactors, boosters, supporters of LSU who could pick up the phone and call Nick Saban. Now, remember we talked about plausible deniability. These aren't necessarily people who are, it's not necessarily Verge Osbury calling Nick Saban. And it's not calling Nick Saban's agent. Again, Nick Saban doesn't need plausible deniability. He's not coaching. It would be different if Nick were coaching at Alabama still, and you have to talk to Jimmy Sexton to engage in those conversations. Nick's not coaching. You can have a direct conversation with Nick Saban if you want. Now, Jimmy Sexton would negotiate any contract if it got to that point. But in the meantime, people who are friends with Nick Saban could call Nick Saban and say, Nick, we need you. Are you interested? What would it take to get you here? Let's make it happen. And I believe that conversation has taken place with multiple people. And maybe the most interesting part of it is, as I understand it, in those very, very, very informal conversations, please do not misunderstand. This is no different than picking up the phone, calling a friend, saying, hey, would you ever be interested in coming back? Like, for all of the reports that are out there about ridiculous offers and prices and salaries, and I mean, it's all out there. And I tell you all the time, what's our mantra? Believe nothing, consider everything. So again, don't believe any of it, but consider the possibility. I'm not telling you anything about contract offers, dollar amounts, any of that stuff, because I don't believe any of that is finalized or even been discussed as of yet. I do believe there has at least been an exploratory conversation, because I have had personal conversations with people who would be aware of this. And there have at least been exploratory conversations to say, would you even be interested? And maybe the most shocking part of that to me is that the answer wasn't no. It's not a yes. It's not even a maybe. But the fact that it wasn't a hard no at least leaves the door even slightly ajar. I would say, again, I want to be very clear. This is my opinion. My opinion. Okay, now I'm telling you, and I don't mind if you want to classify this as reporting or whatever you want to say, that I do believe there are people close to LSU athletics, not necessarily anyone on that search committee, but people close to LSU athletics who have a personal relationship with Nick Saban, multiple people who have had a conversation with Nick, gauging his interest in coming back to LSU. That has happened. I am perfectly fine saying that. I do not believe there's been a contract offer or any of that sort of stuff. or anyone in an official capacity at LSU, I do not believe has had those deep conversations with Nick Saban or Jimmy Sexton, okay? But the most interesting thing is that it's not a no. And if it's not a no, you could get to a yes if all of the stars align in the right circumstances or to fall that way. I believe, now my opinion is this is far less than a 50-50 proposition. Like, I don't even believe this is a coin flip. I think Nick Saban at 74 years old is happy to be retired. I don't think he wants to get back into an era of college football that he didn't really enjoy, which is the reason he left to begin with. I think this is, again, my opinion. I think he loves being on College Game Day. He is making 7, possibly low 8 figures on College Game Day, working for ESPN. I think he is more than content continuing to fill that role until he doesn't want to do that anymore. That's my opinion. And I have not spoken to Nick Saban, okay? But I do believe he would at least listen to what LSU has to offer and what they might be offering, which does leave the door open. Now, remember, now you have to talk about the money, because the governor a week ago made it very clear that he does not want a giant guaranteed contract that could potentially get LSU saddled with a massive buyout. So Kirby Smart right now is the highest paid coach in college football at $13.3 million per year average annual value. So you'd have to go north of 13, right? That just stands to reason. If you're going to get Nick Saban out of retirement, you're going to make him the highest paid coach in the country. Could you get him out of retirement for north of 13? What does that look like? 15 million a year? Okay. I don't know what that number is. But Nick holds all the cards. If you want him, you're going to pay for him. So the thing that could work in LSU's favor here is you wouldn't have to give 74-year-old Nick Saban a 10-year contract. Could you give 74-year-old Nick Saban a 4-year deal? Would he take a 4-year contract? And if he took a 4-year contract at $15 million, that's $60 million. If he coaches 1 year, the buyout of the remainder of the deal would already be less than what Brian Kelly's buyout was. If he coaches 2 years, you understand how that could work? Or there maybe he coaches 4 more years, whatever it may be. But the point being is that you're not guaranteeing the $100 million over 10 years, because you'd be talking about a notably shorter term on this contract. And you better believe that if LSU has the opportunity to hire Nick Saban, the power brokers, the boosters, the people who write checks, right, who write big checks, would line up to get that deal done, whatever they need. And you better believe everyone would be galvanized to invest in NIL and all of the other ancillary things that are needed to build a roster to win if you were able to get Nick Saban back. So I do not think the financial component of this would be a hindrance, even if LSU had to pay him an exorbitant amount of money for a shorter term deal. I don't think that would be in any way an unclearable hurdle. The biggest hurdle is, could you actually get Nick Saban to walk away from TV, a multi-million-dollar annual contract, to jump back into coaching at 74 when he left, obviously, for a reason? And then we could have the question of if that's even a good idea on the field. I think it is. I mean, he's the greatest coach of all time. And I have no doubt Nick's ability and willingness to adapt through different eras. He could do this flawlessly as well. If he actually had the desire to do it. The question is, does he have the desire? What I will tell you now, Shaquille O'Neal didn't say that just plucking it from the air. And what I'm okay telling you is that there have been informal conversations, and it's not a no. I do not believe it's as far down the road as some on the internet have suggested it is. But it's not a no. And to get to a yes, you have to at least clear that first hurdle, which they have. I love the silly season. It's ridiculous. But as we always say it again, believe nothing, consider everything, even the possibility of 74-year-old Nick Saban coming out of retirement to coach LSU again. As that develops, we'll talk about it right here on Locked on LSU. Hey, thanks so much for making it your first listen If you're on podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video. And let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you here every single day for Locked On LSU, your team every day.